the live cold calls you guys do is like, did you have to build yourself up for those, or do you just throw yourself into it? Because watching you guys gives me anxiety doing it. Like even in front of an audience is worse. But what do you guys feel when you're about to do those?
It's a fine line, isn't it? It's like the same as everything. I think like when in the early days of the business, we were doing it in front of people on a regular basis. So I think it's like anything, people get that fear, that rejection. I think it takes a lot of time and a lot of conversations with yourself to kind of. I think I did a post this morning about like the fear of rejection, and it's not something that it will never go away completely. Like it will always be a bit scary. I think Rod Stewart probably still gets a little bit of anxiety before he goes on stage, but it's one of those things. It will always be there, but it's just like, right, what is the intention here? And it's like, I know the reward. And you know what? Some of my calls, what I've found, when Zach might chime in on this, but what I've found when I do live cold calling, like a lot of the skill kind of, it goes out the window. It gets a little bit like grabby. Like I feel like I just want to be like, the intention is not to have the best cold call. I feel like my ego takes over a little bit, and it's like, right, okay, how do I book a meeting in the quickest time possible? So it's the more I do of them, the more the better I get. But the audience, when we do live cold calling and comments on YouTube videos, everyone's so like not forgiving, but just so open to it. It's like, oh, that was really good, or I've learned something new there. So it's less about the desired outcome. It's more about the journey, which is life, I guess. Zach?
Yeah, it is life. What about you, Zach?
I think the scariest live cold calling that I do is actually when we get a new starter that's gone through an academy with us for 2 weeks, and then I like to show them at the end. I'll just ring a random person and show you that this works. That's probably the scariest moment of, am I able to back it up? And do you feel like it's a make or break moment that they always remember that, like for the rest of the time? Well, Zach did it in one call and got a good response. So those are the scary. In terms of doing it live or in front of an audience or of people we don't work with, that doesn't really bother me at all.
It's more when we've done training before, and it's like, right, okay, like you go into a company, you do some training. I don't know your product or service. We work on like maybe a new script or something. It's like, right, let me cold call for this. And they look at you like, there's no way that you could cold call for my product or service. You don't know it. I've been here 4 years and I struggle with it. And then you're like, yeah, but are you really focusing on like the problem and the solution side of things?
Yeah, it's that's what amazed me as well, because you know, I've done loads of sales training. I've done a million cold calls in my time, different types of jobs. I started off in like Southern Electric telesales, and it was very much like targeting 88-year-olds who couldn't quite hear. And then they get passed off to like a verification team, which the sales team hated because they jam through a 91-year-old who doesn't even know what broadband is, but we wanted to switch them over to the Southern Electric broadband. And then the verification team would be like, sorry, who is this? And they'd be like, no, you've agreed to sign up to this contract. Is that not right? So, but the mindset, is that, would you say that's the biggest battle rather than the actual technical execution of a sales call? Or does it have to be both?
Zach?
You want me to start with that one, do you? Mindset will get you to the dance, 100%. And really, when we hire our own people and we train people, the biggest obstacle is, are you comfortable with rejection? And do you get too high off validation? Both are an issue. Like, you think of it as salespeople tend to have these like massive peaks and troughs, and they're usually based on emotional attachment to the outcome of the conversation or the sales process. So the ideal mindset, it might sound weird, is not like a super positive mental attitude. It's actually a complete indifference to the whole process. If I get a no, I expect a no. I'm in sales. If I get a yes, I've done an amount of work that will justify that I get a yes at the end of it. So it's almost like expected based on evidence rather than relying on feeling. And, sales isn't like working on a building site or something, or saving people's lives in a heart surgery theatre. It's really what people are feeling when they say, oh, burnt out, is a complete inability to manage emotional state. They've got too emotional about it. They think someone's rejecting them, not the offering. And they think someone's validating them, not the offering. You're like putting yourself in the process too much. And when people can remove themselves from that, they tend to have a much better experience. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. It does. I read something. I can't remember where I read it, or heard it, but they were talking about a football referee, and he was saying how referees have to do a similar sort of thing because obviously they get a lot of shit from the players, and they have to learn. It's really important they learn that the players aren't angry at them as a person; they're angry at the uniform, and they're angry at the decision and the context of the decision. So that's it's very important in different industries, especially sales. Do you guys think then that there's obviously natural salespeople, and I think that's a very small percentage of people. But do you think anyone can do sales, or do you feel like there's just people who just don't have that ability to remove themselves emotionally from the decision, no matter how much training they get?
It's interesting.
Go on, Jack.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, when you say that people are natural salespeople, what do they look like? What's an example of a natural salesperson?
So for me, I've met very few, very, very few, and a lot of them don't actually know what they're doing. Like some of the best salespeople I've met, they are just very good at naturally structuring things. So I think the probably better way for me to explain it is the struggle I had. So for many years, I really didn't understand sales. And because of the way my brain works, structuring a conversation and leading them through essentially a process and having that all mapped out in my head. And this is before people taught me about sales scripts and stuff, because it's just not how I was trained. It was all very much on the fly, which is not how I can sell. But mine was also messy. It was all over the place. And, I maybe handle objections too early, or I wouldn't qualify properly or whatever. Whereas the people I've met who sort of don't necessarily know what they're doing, but they're doing it very well, is they're able to run through a process in their mind in an organized way to a conclusion, and get them to that end point, or disqualify them and get them out of the process, if that makes sense.
We could sit here and I could argue, I guess, that the natural salespeople, I think that certain people might have kind of skill set or different attributes that would make up what a salesperson is. For me, it's what Zach was alluding to. Like, it's that predictability. It's that art form. The best salespeople, it is that kind of art, but also meets science. So it's like that kind of, I know that if I do this, this happens, and you can bring that skill set to the table. I think there are certain people that could work in sales and have good careers, but I feel like that they probably would never get to. There are certain people that just shouldn't probably work in sales. Do you know what I mean? It's all about them, and that's their personality, or they don't think enough to ask thought-provoking questions. They can't listen. Those kind of things. And sometimes, and this is going to sound awful, but sometimes people's voice or their tonality, like we've had interviews with people, and you're probably maybe an element of sales. You could probably work in an element, but if we're thinking about like, okay, you've got to work your way up through the ranks of prospecting to discovery call and the rest. Some people just don't sound the part, and that can kind of, and if they cold call, eventually they'll get. I reckon if you just put a monkey in a room and gave him access to AI and got him cold calling for 1,000 years, eventually they would land on a deal. Eventually something would happen, right? But that's not to say that just because somebody's been working in sales for 10 years, cold calling, eventually luck will play a part of that. For good salespeople, you want to be like, okay, what is the predictability? If I call 20 people, I bring these skills to the table, eventually that will lead to this. They're, in my opinion, the best salespeople.
Okay. Thoughts, Zach?
Yeah, I've not met a natural salesperson ever.
Interesting.
Certainly not in the style that we do it. I've met natural, like, people who say it, I'm a natural salesperson. What they probably mean is I'm a bit of a wheeler dealer, charmer, gift of the gab type of person. That isn't sales. Salespeople are more. There's a term in special forces, they call it the grey man. So like SAS, they tend to look for someone who's the grey man. He just fits into any audience and doesn't really stand out too much. And he's more able to enable the situation in whatever scenario it needs to go. So like a chameleon almost. So you find like, discovery calls that go really well tend to not really be anything about us. We don't pitch anything. We don't really sell anything. We just almost ask like therapy style questions that get the other person talking. Cold calls, we don't mention our name, don't talk about the product. At the end of the call, it's gone well when they say, you know what, I don't even know where you're calling from or what your name is. So really, like, if I was to meet someone who is a natural salesperson, I'd probably be thinking, God, I know nothing about that person. All they've done is find out things about me, and they've made me feel quite secure and comfortable opening up to them. And I think what most people think is a natural salesperson isn't that. It's probably someone you think, God, he would get on a stage and he'd get us all going to war tomorrow. He'd motivate us to go and kick everyone's door down and rob everyone's house in the neighborhood. But in terms of what we actually look for, I've never met anyone who can do that naturally.
Okay. Interesting. So I think what would be good is, could you guys just give us a background for people who just don't know who you are? Can you give us a background of you guys? And obviously you've set up, we have a meeting. But what I think would be interesting is to know a little bit around your guys' individual sales journeys. Like, how did you learn how to sell? Because like I said, for me, it took me years of graft and intentional learning, rather than just doing the activity over and over again. So I don't know, Jack, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll leave it to Zach to talk about like why we have a meeting exists, because that's Zach had the brainwave. Zach created that. He is the father of this baby, and then I've come in and raised it with him along the way. But I guess in terms of sales, me and Zach actually, we never worked together, but we had our first sales job when we were like 15, 16, the same company in our hometown, and it was selling advertising space, B2B. And it was one of those jobs you sit down and it's like, here's a yellow pages, like start at the beginning or start at the end, just call people and do it. And I was awful, like really, really bad. Like, and I have been along the way, like a lot of jobs, like it'd be stupid to say here, like every job I've had in sales, I've been amazing. I've done well, like, and I've made money along the way, but I've always had other passions, and it's weird. It's like I've always been into music and the arts and things like that, and sales has been like the side hustle more than the main dinner. But what I think the skill that I got along the time, and I didn't really realize at the time, but like a year here doing a sales job, a year there, like a lot of B2C stuff. Like I was selling IVAs at one point. I was like selling life insurance at one point. And that muscle, when you're cold calling people or even warm calling over and over and over again, it starts to build up and you don't really realize. But it's like if you go to the gym every single day for 10 years and you just pick up a weight, eventually something will happen. So it's like that's where I didn't think it was deliberate or anything. And I remember when I worked at read.co.uk, the UK's #1 job site, 10 years ago. And I remember sitting in a room and them training us, and they were teaching us Sandler. And honestly, I was 20 something years old and I didn't give a shit. I was just like, no, I know how to sell. I've got the gift of the gab. I'm a natural born salesman, probably like what we were alluding to. I'm all right. And I'd get on there and I'd lie and I'd say things like, oh, you've got a 4-year-old. I've got a 4-year-old, blah, 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 rapport, all of that nonsense. And it was only when Zach told me like he was starting to get into this new methodology and we'd have hour-long chats on his way home from work, my way home from work. And when he started to set up the business, it was like, there's a new method in town that's actually been around for years and years. And it's one of those things of like, although I've not been applying this method for a decade, I don't have 10 years of experience selling this style. what we both did is we both put a lot of time and investment into how do I get really good at this really quickly. And I think that's probably where you're best to pick up, Zach.
Yeah. Shall I give you how the business started and why? Is that where we are?
Yeah, just whatever, really. Whatever's interesting.
Okay. I don't know if it's interesting. You can be the judge of that. So basically, when the pandemic hit, I was working for a company that was in the event space. They put on physical events. So you can imagine working in that sort of business in sales was total train came to a halt. And they kind of moved to like a marketing offering. So what was happening was I had all these clients that had all these leads that were being generated. But what they were saying to me was, I don't really need this. What I need is someone like you, who, even though there's a pandemic happening, the working from home, could go out and kick doors down and get meetings for us like you did with us. And it just kept coming up as a planting of the seed in my head. And then I was actually listening to a Benjamin Dennehy podcast, and he was saying that if you're working from home and you're prospecting of making a business money and they're taking the lion's share, you probably shouldn't be doing that anymore. You should probably go self-employed and just do it for yourself. And it was a weird like marriage of those two things. People saying, I need someone like you to do this for me, like a need in the space that was coming up often. And then hearing that from Benjamin, and it was connecting those two dots. And then I basically had a chat with Jack that I was thinking of setting it up, and Jack was at a time in his life where he was debating what to do next as well. And we were in a position where I took the plunge a few months earlier, had my fourth child on the way, had a mobile phone and a dodgy laptop to try and make it work and get through gatekeepers and things, and 1 month's wage and a bit of a dream. And then 9 calls in on my first day, a bloke said to me, if you can genuinely do that for me, I will buy that right now. And I thought, you know what, might be onto something here. And away we went. The rest is history.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, one of the first questions they ask is, why is it called We Have a Meeting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was under no illusion that I was going to have to get through gatekeepers. I didn't even know all the tech and databases and stuff that we use now exist. Our guys will complain sometimes, say, oh, this list is just all office numbers. Thank God, I've never had that luxury. When I was an employed salesperson, always had to go through gatekeepers. And the first conundrum that I thought of was, when I'm ringing people, I need to have a name that gets me through gatekeepers. And I used to work for a construction tech company, and their name was a site, like a site, a construction site. So I always thought it was quite clever, like a way of getting through gatekeepers. Where are you calling from? From a site. Oh, right, okay, I'll put you through. So I thought I was clever. And then when I was thinking of our name for what we do, how could I get through a gatekeeper quickly without them really questioning me? There's no cloak and dagger to it. I was thinking, like, try and sound like a law firm. Didn't like that. Thought, what's something that you could say? And it just came to me naturally. We have a meeting. If I said we have a meeting to someone, they'd go, oh, right, okay, fair enough. I won't question that, and I'll put you straight through. So the sole purpose of the business name is to get past gatekeepers. And if you've got a business that sells on email, phone, that's any cold channel, you should think about what your business is called, because no one wants to read an email from printersaregreat.com.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's really clever, actually, because I don't think a lot of people consider that. They sort of do the name first, something that maybe sounds snazzy, but yours is your business name, but it's functional in your job you do as well, right? So yeah, that's really interesting. So you talk about gatekeepers there. I'm sure, like, this is probably one of the number one questions you get. You might be sick of answering it, but for sales beginners who are, like, I don't know, in their first year, really struggling, and, for the people you train as well, what advice do you give to people to get past gatekeepers? How do you do that?
There's probably 2 components to it. One that, I don't know if you would call it a skill, but the tone of who you're selling to, or you're trying to get hold of, what do they sound like? So let's say you're getting hold of someone that's like a C-suite person. What do they sound like? If you're trying to get hold of a marketing director who's probably more chatty and agreeable and nice and goes to events and stuff, what do they sound like? If you sound kind of meek and mild and like you don't belong, human beings have a great authenticity detector and they will sniff you out on that call quickly. So if you're trying to get hold of a CEO, what does a CEO sound like when they speak to someone? So when I pick up the phone, how do I actually sound is the first component. So I ring up, I'm trying to get hold of Jack, please. Would you be able to put me through? That's very different than if I rang up and said, Jack's not in, is he? Great, yeah, if you put me through, that'd be great. Like there's a real tone that needs to be there first. And I've had arguments with people saying this isn't that important, but I promise you there's a massive difference when you make those little adjustments, micro adjustments to your tone with who your ICP is. They make a massive difference. And then Jack, I don't know if you want to do the actual words, where you can maybe go back and forth on this.
Well, it's less is more, isn't it? Your job is, think of it like when you call up a lovely receptionist, you've got a little taser and you've kind of got to stun them, and they're going to throw so many different questions at you. Who are you? Where are you calling from? What's it about? Your job is less is more. So you call up and you'd say, Zach's not in today. And they go, who's calling? Oh, can you tell him it's Jack? Thank you. Less is more, short, sharp. You're never being rude. Okay. But if you go down the line of, well, I'm calling from printers are bloody marvelous.com. We're trying to sell a print. It just screams like this is a sales call. And your job is, and the more you do to get past the gatekeeper, eventually when you get through to someone, it is a sales call. I've battled mighty gatekeepers in the past. And when you get through, you go, yeah, I thought it was a sales call, so I'm just going to hang up, bang. And then it's over. And there's not much that you can do in that moment. But there isn't anything that will work 100% of the time, but you've really got to think. And I think where a lot of salespeople kind of go wrong is they don't bring that, and this is probably where my drama degree comes in handy, but that theatrical creative element, like we're all different people. The person you are when you're with your parents, to your partner, to your friends, to your boss, we're all different people. So why would you not be a different element that you bring to the table when you're calling somebody? So that's the thing. So you've got to bring that. Right now, if I'm going to call and I'm trying to speak to CEOs, well, I'm going to be the CEO. Jack's not in today, is he?
It's a great point, that, and the creative element of, we've got a client who they deal with like smaller trades companies, maybe 10 people max. So they're probably all sat in the office together. So if I ring up and I'm trying to get hold of the boss, what language do I use if I'm in that industry? When the gatekeeper picks up, I say, is the boss in? Is the chief there? Is he in? And then they go, oh, what, Brian? Yeah, hold on. Who is it? Oh, it's Zach. Okay, right, I'll put you through. So there's an element of what do interactions sound like in that business as well. And there's even stuff like if you're ringing big companies, so you're ringing big companies and you're trying to get hold of someone, picking a random, when it's like option, pick a random option 4 for accounts or something. When you get when someone answers, oh, that's not Brian Smith, is it? I've got oh no, Brian Smith, he works in, well, I don't know what I've done here. How would I? Oh God, I'm supposed to speak. How would I get hold of him? Oh, I'll just put you through. Because a gatekeeper's job is designed to stop that interaction and really question it. So if you've got another option of someone who doesn't get a lot of calls in the big blue chip companies, and you call them up, you're confused, I've made a mistake, most people are inclined to want to help you and put you through. It's a bit sneaky. Not everyone will like that, but it does work.
Yeah, but that's the game, right? So I see a lot of, I think I've seen you guys comment on it, it's probably more so Jack, but I've seen there's different sales voices with completely different approaches, isn't there? And a lot of them say you should build relationships over time with gatekeepers. What do you guys think of that?
It's 100% correct. No, it's I don't get it. Like it's bizarre. It's balmy. Like what is, okay, well, let's break it down. And to the people that say that, well, what is a salesperson's job? Is to qualify the right person or disqualify the wrong person. It's like, if you're just building a relationship, it's a nice fairy tale, and it's a nice story, and it's a nice narrative that we tell ourselves that could work, that one day somebody out the kindness of their heart is eventually going to feel sorry. And what probably has happened, David, is somebody's made friends with all these gatekeepers, And there has been one that said, you know what, you're such a lovely guy. I'm going to put you through to the CEO. He's bought the biggest, most fantastic printer in the world. And somebody said, well, look, do I doubt that it works? No. And this is the thing with any kind of sales methodology, people are saying, well, no, this works over this. And it's like, well, no, I bet it all works, right? But what you're trying to do is have an effective use of your time. Okay, so I'm a busy salesperson. I want to speak to busy people that might have the problems I solve. If you're spending 5 minutes talking to Sinead on front desk about what little Archie's up to at the weekend, well, is that a good use of your time? Well, probably not. So it's like, right, what can I actually do in my time that's going to give me the most and the maximum return? It's like when you think about Olympic runners, they're like seconds in it. Oh, I was the champion because I beat you by 0.02 seconds. So what are you doing against other people to get that edge when it comes to time? If you're spending 5 minutes speaking to Sinead, then you're wasting your time. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Sales is fascinating, isn't it, really? Because people look at it like people who don't know how to sell, have never been in sales, they think it's just grunt work. You pick up the phone, you annoy people until they buy from you, essentially, right? But what I find fascinating about it, it is like the art of human communication, isn't it? And for me anyway, I don't know about you guys, but not so much the longer I was in sales, but the more I learned about selling, it actually helped me like outside of my job as well. Like just communicating with people and, handling objections. If my fiance wants to go to a restaurant and I want to go to a different restaurant, I think it helps you sort of like structure conversation as well. And it is fascinating because you only have to look at how many sales books there are out there and how many different methodologies. And, for every Jordan Belfort, you've got a Grant Cardone or a Benjamin Dennehy, or you guys. So, and a lot of them are expert or claiming to be experts and then arguing with the other experts. So I think someone coming into sales cold, like first job, it can be quite difficult to know what to believe, don't you think?
There's always experts though, and I would play that. If we're being honest, like you could say, like, is cold emailing a good thing? Well, yeah, probably. You probably do get like if Lavender, for example, that the company that sells like an AI tool for cold emailing, does it work? Yeah. Is it really good? Probably. Do I argue with him on his posts about cold emailing being a waste of time? Yeah, because it's engagement as well. And we know that those kind of things, like it's a marketing tool, but it's one of the things. Where do you start? There are a lot of gurus out there that are trying to get quick wins, and it's about finding a style that works for you. Some people, Andy Elliott, I can't imagine Zac taking his top off for a buzz meeting and start getting people ramped up like that.
What's this? I've not seen this guy.
He's a car sales guy who says that he put Grant Cardone out of business. He doesn't work in the industry anymore because of him. But it's one of those ones where as soon as you watch it, all your recommendations will be Andy Elliott. Very American guy, calling everyone a loser.
Right.
Saying, yeah, so I don't know. I tell you at your own peril. If you watch those videos, you will only see those videos, so be careful.
Right. Okay, I've got a guy in the recruitment world that I can't get away from on YouTube. I won't say his name, but I watched one video because I think it was sent to me, and Google, YouTube, I literally can't escape the guy. I've even done the little arrow, not interested, report this ad, leave me alone, and they won't leave me alone. But I suppose he spent a lot of money on advertising. But going back to because again, this is something that me and Jack spoke about quite recently. But with regards to calling people up, not knowing anything about them, right? So I was always taught to do research, because if they ask you, you get the odd person that's like, what do you know about us, right? And this is why I was so taken back, but super curious around why maybe you don't do that and other people don't do that. But then how would you actually, if you're called out on it, say someone says to you, have you even looked at our website, whatever, because you're asking questions that might be available on their website. why do you guys do it? Is it purely time efficiency, or is there other reasons? And how would you actually handle that, like, pushback from the prospect?
It's creepy, I think. I really, really hate it when I'm on a sales call and they like have their like faux research that they've done. I don't like it. Doesn't make me feel like any closer to them. I think it's creepy, and they're trying to connect dots, make assumptions. We've been on discovery calls before, and I will call people out on it. Like the dots that you've connected based on your research are all assumptive, and it's just not. And we might have grown up in the same area, gone to the same school. I don't really care. I'm like anti-relationship building. Does not work for me. And if you're dealing with someone who like needs you to have done research before you call them, they've got a complete ego complex, and you probably don't want to work with them anyway. Now, if I get the way our formula is styled, is if I'm ringing an ICP on behalf of a customer, I would think of statistically these 3 problems need to exist to make this a worthwhile conversation, and then I make it all about you. So there's nothing that I could say like, oh, the answer's on this website, because I'm actually asking you quite personal, therapized questions about a problem, rather than it might work if I was looking to like shoehorn some features into what you do, but I'm not looking to do that. I'm looking to get very personal about problems that you face. If I got called out on it, what's an example of me getting called out on it? What would someone say?
Well, I'll give you an example. What happened to me, right? So I was like, fuck it, I'll give it a go. I just won't do any research. I'm just going to go in blind. And I won't lie to you, I was shitting myself, because I was like, I felt so anxious. Like, and I was like, please don't ask me, because I had it. To be fair, right, as well, just to go off on a little tangent, I've only ever had someone ask me, like, do you know what we do? Have you looked on our website? That sort of stuff. I've ever had it happen a few times, and they were just doing it to be dicks. They were never going to work with me anyway.
Yeah.
I think I only had it once where he really grilled me, but I think that was more to do with the information on the database being wrong. I think their company name was actually wrong on the database or something, so it was completely wrong. But so what did the guy say? I basically just asked him a question about, you know, the services that he provides, and is in recruitment as well, to give you some context. And he was like, well, this is all on our website. Have you not looked at our website? I bet you're looking at it now, aren't you, in a rush, sort of thing. And I definitely messed it up. So my response was, I'd taken a very quick glance to the point where I just knew that they recruited into the fast-moving consumer goods industry. That's all I knew. And then he got a bit arsey about that, essentially saying, well, you should have done research. I think the exact words he used were, I would have respected you more if you actually did some research into our business. So I don't know, how would you have dealt with that? Or do you think he was just being a dick?
How was the conversation going before that happened?
It was very early on. So it was literally like, you know, can I grab 30 seconds? And it was like my first or second question. It was like, what I asked recruitment directors. Okay, so what I asked recruitment directors is a hypothetical, which is, you know, if a prospect asked you, what can you offer us apart from good CVs, with the context of winning retained work, what would you say to that? You know, what's your actual tangible services that you offer apart from bog standard recruitment? And 99% of the time it works. I think this is the first guy that kicked off on me about it, because I'm usually asking it on like meetings anyway, rather than cold calls. But it was very early on. It was like the first or second question.
Okay. It sort of depends on when it comes up. If someone said it to me and they've just jumped on a call, they don't know much about us, and it's like a discovery call, let's give you that example. If someone says, I don't know how much research you know, how much you know about us, I always respond and say, imagine I know nothing. And then they go, right, okay, well, I'll start from the top. If I'm on a cold call and it's like, oh, someone's calling me out here that have I done any research? Say, you know what? I think if I'd opened your website and read a few bits on your website, I don't think that's going to tell me the full story of everything I need to know. That's why I've been brave and picked up the phone. But you might tell me that the answer to everything I'm about to ask you is on your website. most reasonable people are going to say, well, no, that's not the case at all. There's also probably in your world, like the recruitment world, a lot of websites that look exactly the same and a lot of businesses that look exactly the same. So there's probably something in that as well of what I don't want to do is assume just because you work in X industry that someone else that works in X industry is exactly the same and tar you with the same brush. I think that's fair. Yeah, so that's why I'm asking these questions. So it's just reinforcing why that is. But yeah, it's a total like waste of time. If I say I do 10 minutes research with every single person that I call, 10 minutes over the course of my week that's a lot of conversation time. And just in our line of work, we probably wouldn't have the success that we've had if I was doing that. I'm with you though. Sometimes, and I think when I pushed you on that point, you didn't have that many examples when that's happened in your world. So I don't think it happens that much. But our negative bias, we always remember like, oh, but the one time I didn't, he really exposed me.
Yeah, and that was 6 years ago. And I still
that
think
was 6 years ago. Bloody hell.
Sound like it was yesterday.
I thought it was last
David.
week. Christ.
No. The one time prior, sorry. This happened a couple of weeks ago, but before that, I was thinking about it because I actually messaged Jack and I was like, "This just happened to me, mate. How would you deal with this?" And then I really thought about it, and I was like, "If this only happens to me 2 times in 6 years, like that's all right. I can deal with that."
They're nice odds.
But then, like you said, I was going to say it then, but the time that you spend on doing research before a cold call, I've worked with recruiters before who they'll spend 5-10 minutes per call and they'll go to voicemail, get kicked off by a gatekeeper, speak to them. It's like, how many people have you got hold of today? And they're like, like none in the last 2 hours. How many calls have you made? It's not that many calls. It's because you're doing 5-10 minutes research. Do you think it's like the people who advocate it, it's almost paralysis analysis, like they're doing it so they don't have to pick up the phone, basically?
Definitely.
Yeah, people procrastinate all day if you let them.
Or they convince themselves that that's the way that it should be done. We were literally, it's really interesting that you said that. We were literally talking about this morning in my buzz meeting in the training session. We heard it on a call. Somebody said, well, what do you know about me? But there's going to be the 1% that is a dick that just needs their ego stroking. Really, nobody cares, but they're curious at that point, and you just switch it around. If I was asking your question, you might give it a bit of a softener. Say, listen, David, can I ask a bit of a silly question? Yeah. Apart from, and then that says like, I know that what I'm asking you might tell me it's all on your website, but I want to hear it from your mouth. Okay. Like I want to know. So it's like giving it, can I sound like an idiot for a minute? Apart from good CVs, I'm sure there's a million things, but what do you say that you offer? I need to hear it from you rather than a website or anything like that. It's like, we're hearing this conversation. It's not about my assumptions. It's about what you see and the way your world works. I think it's that kind of thing. But I would just say that guy was a total twat.
Agreed. That's interesting, actually. Yeah, those slight small changes just reframes the whole sentence and gives it like a completely different tone, doesn't it? So
yeah,
it's
got an ask an obvious question.
Yeah, exactly. Preempting questions. This is going to sound silly. This is going to sound the most obvious question ever. It really just gets someone on board with whatever you have to say. Like when we ask a question. But what could often happen is when someone gives you a problem, what they really give you is a symptom of a problem. I find the recruitment process quite manual. That's not a problem. That's the symptom of a problem. Okay, and then I would follow that up and say, you know what? This is going to sound like the most obvious question you've ever been asked. How do you know that's a problem? Oh, because it takes too much time out of the day. Okay, again, it's really obvious. Why is that bad? Well, because I don't get to go home enough. I've just had a baby, and I want to be home in time to bath them. Right, okay, now we're at the problem. That's the language that we use when we go to that level of depth. We only get there by asking those really obvious questions. And if I didn't preface them, someone would go, come on, mate, are you an idiot? Like this starts sounding quite jarring.
I did some training with an insurance company last week, and everything's got a trigger. So if something happened, somebody's applied. I know that insurance is a bit of a different world, but it's a speciality insurance where it's still quite problem solving rather than you go compare. And the first question is like, well, what made you get in contact? And that's probably a few different angles of, well, you were a referral, or I'm trying to solve this problem, blah, blah, blah. And I was speaking to them about it. They were like, but I just feel like when I say, why have you got in contact with us? Because it was all inbound and warm. Everyone's just going to say, I need insurance, which is a fair point. Okay. Yeah. You need insurance. Okay. So when you say, listen, David, I've got to ask a bit of a silly question, but what was it that made you get in touch today? They're not going to say, oh, I need insurance. You will get the 1%, which is what we're talking about. What you're probably going to get is somebody, what we really understand is why you're here, what problem we're trying to solve. And it'd be a bit basic to say, okay, what problem are you trying to solve and why you're here? So it's like, if you can give a softener like that and then lead into the conversation, a silly question, what made you get in touch today? And then they'll open up, and like Zach saying, well, what do you mean? Can you give me an example? How do you know that? And then you take them down that chart.
Yeah. What do you mean is the best sales question in the world. It's not the really ridiculous intellectual stuff. It's when you say this, what did you mean? What does that mean? And just being like the scratching your head. I don't know what anything you say means. Really, really explain it to me. I'm 5 years old. Explain it to me. I've
seen this a lot in the recruitment world, both as like a coach and trainer, but also, just sitting in on meetings and stuff. One thing I used to see quite a lot in tech recruitment is essentially ego taking over with recruiters. They don't want to look like they don't know something. And they'll, so I'll give an example. I was on a meeting and this head of engineering or something was talking about a specific niche technology. And the recruiter I was with completely blagged that he knew what the guy was talking about with a programming language or something, right? I come out of the meeting, I was like, I didn't know you knew about that. And he's like, nah, I just made stuff up, mate. But I actually, I know a guy who won like quite a big account at a recruitment company I worked with. And he won it purely because he said, what do you mean? And it was because the guy was like, I think they were like vetting agencies and they were going to pick one of the 6 or something, right, to be their exclusive supplier, something like that. And what he would do, the guy he'd make up a programming language and he'd be like, so what we really need is like this X whatever developer. And all the recruiters apart from him said, no, we've filled those before, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But he was the one who went, I've never heard of that. I don't know what you're talking about. Can you tell me more about that? Because I look stupid. But and he worked with him because he was like, you're the only one who actually was honest. So how is there any way you can like? It goes back to mindset, but how do you get over that like ego-driven need to sound like you know what you're talking about?
There's a quote, isn't there? And I like quotes because they're kind of like the Uno cards that you can play in the moment where like, oh, right, okay, I feel like this, let me play this. But it's ask a question, you might look like an idiot for 5 minutes. Don't ask the question, you look like an idiot for the whole of your life. Something like that. Inverted commas and all that. But it's the same, the logic applies, but be curious. That's what you typically find in a sales company is somebody comes in and it could be an amalgamation of things like they're motivated, it's their first job, but the first 3 months they smash it because they don't have all this product knowledge and all these features and benefits ringing round. So they're just like, what do you mean? I'm genuinely trying to solve a problem and I'm listening more because I don't want to talk much more because I don't actually know anything to talk about. But then what happens over time is you go, well, I'm going to put you in this office because I know that's the best office. Everyone always chooses that. But you've not actually listened and it gets heavy. But be curious. Be curious throughout. Like the best salespeople are the ones that are curious.
Yeah, exactly. I think any self-improvement or sales improvement comes from self-awareness. And if you're self-aware, you're very aware of the role that your ego plays. People who are aware of their ego aren't also egotistical at the same time. It's usually the people you spot who have that problem are completely unaware of themselves. And often this game of sales is it's like a reflective exercise. How much of this suffering is purely in my imagination compared to the actual reality of it? Someone picks up the phone to you, you tell them it's a cold call and they say, oh, fuck off and hang up on you. Was that to you, or did the cat get run over on the way into work today, or have they just found out that their wife's having an affair? Or you've got to quickly think to yourself, when have I behaved like that in my life? Because no one wakes up just wanting to be like that. And equally, going back to, I made a point before about this authenticity detector. Like, people know when they're being blagged. So if you're there trying to persuade and push your agenda, people will just react. And even if it doesn't feel like they do in the moment, oh, it was a great demo, it was a great presentation, and they've gone away and they're going to think about it, you'll never hear from them again because you got in your own way. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot to that. But like, is there anything that can be done on it? You have to do that journey yourself, I think. We'll have the chat. We've got a young sales team. We'll have that chat with them, and I'm very aware that it won't come for a few years, and I won't be the one to teach it them. They'll find that out via life.
Yeah. Interesting. I think to wrap this up, it'd be really good to just understand from each of you, what's the first things, like, I don't know, the first 3 or 4 things that you teach someone who's new to sales? So they're just getting into prospecting, they don't know anything about it. Where do you feel like, what's the first 3 or 4 things that you teach them to give them the foundation fundamentals? Yeah.
I'll take the first one, Jack, and then we'll bat it over to you. One of the first things, and we actually do this in the interview, is we try and find out how naturally their sort of questioning, problem-solving, empathetic brain works. So I'd say to you, David, let's imagine me and you are friends, we've met in the pub, and I tell you that I think I'm going to leave my wife. What's the first question you'd ask me? What's the first question you'd ask me?
Why are you leaving your wife?
Right, exactly. And then we'll go down that path, right? And then it's looking for how they explore that. But some people, when I say that to them, and I frame it exactly like that, they give me a lecture on why I shouldn't leave my wife and start to assume problems and give me ways that they might fix it. The best people do what you did and say, why? Okay, have you tried this? Wow, that sounds really frustrating. And I'm trying to show that that is the exact same as when a prospect gives you a problem. You take it on that exact same journey. So that's the first thing that we teach, and that's from the interview that we do that. Jack?
I'd say then the second part is probably the psychology. It feels like I won't say lecture, because a lecture has connotations to being boring, but it's really understanding the human brain, the chimp paradox, all of these wonderful things. And there's no point just saying, here's a pattern interrupt, go and use it, if you don't know what you're trying to engage with them. So obviously with the chimp brain, the reason we use a pattern interrupt and the ones that we use is the majority of the pattern interrupts we use, depending on clients, are permission based and things like that. And there's humor and there's honesty and there's room to say no. So we have to give them a bit of a psychology lesson for them to understand these are all the different biases that you have and the prospect has. This is how they might appear in conversation. So it's like, let's take it back to basics. We're all human, and this is why we react the way that we react. Yeah. Is that the right one, Zac?
That was the right one. And I think
do you want to do number 3?
I think the next one I'd give you is, and I think this blows people's minds, but you can't persuade anyone of anything. The way our brains are wired, you can't be persuaded. If I just approach you on the way to the car and start trying to persuade you to do something, and I don't know you, you'll almost actively be repulsed by me and not want to do the total opposite of what I'm telling you to do. Our brains are just not wired for persuasion. But if you think your job actually in sales is to just get someone to think, I just want you to think deeply. That's my only role here. And what happens when you think deeply, you attach an emotion. And then when you attach an emotion, you tend to act. And people might think, well, how do I know someone's thinking deeply? You know it because it's when people pause and think before they answer, or they start going, oof, that's a good question. It's time to think a little bit more about it. And that's when the emotion's starting to be attached. So, and it takes that bit takes a while, because in our world, people want to talk about, well, I've got this client, I want to tell the prospect how great their product is and start pitching their product to them. When you start pitching a product, we've got the stats in our system to prove it. As soon as you do that pitch about what a product is and what it does, the response is send me an email or call me back, or I've already got something like that. No one ever goes, you're a what? A cloud-based CRM? Oh my God. let me get my diary out quick. That never ever happens. So you can't persuade anyone of anything. And then, do you want to give a number 4, Jack, to round it off?
I'd probably say that once you've kind of got the fundamentals, then you can start really understanding like the pitch, and you can start having a conversation. I think the big one is pace. If you feel like you're going a normal pace, slow down. The majority of new people, especially when they get onto the phones, at some point very early on, they've got to go. They can't spend 3 months preparing for cold calling. It used to be half an afternoon, and then we kind of spread it out over a few days now. But you've got to jump in the deep end. We're big fans of the Sandler book. You can't teach your kids to ride a bike at a seminar, and that's for a reason. Of like, you have to learn on the job, and like you have to fall off and get a couple of bruises. But when you're going into those calls, your adrenaline's going to be pumping. You're probably going to speak a lot faster than you should be. So pace. Let's read through this script or this structure, but let's do it in a nice, slow manner.
Yeah, I really like that one as well, because that's the main problem I had. I used to get so nervous before calls. I would speak so much. I would speak too often. And also, I wouldn't listen really to what the person was saying, because I was constantly thinking about how I could respond. Like, what's the next thing I could say? And I had a CEO tell me to fuck off because he was telling me his company was failing and he's having to make everyone redundant. And I was like, okay. So do you have a PSL then? Or like, what agencies do you work? And he's like, mate, I'm telling you, my business is failing here. And I was like, yeah, I know, but should we have a meeting? So it was just, that was a big turning point for me. But no, boys, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's all really insightful, and I've learned a lot as well. So hopefully others people will. If people want to work with you, how do they find you? Where should they connect with you?
You've got to track us down. If you want to work with us, we're very busy. You'd have to
you probably don't
walk
want
the streets of... No, you don't. Walk the streets of Manchester with Manchester or Bournemouth with a bin bag, and if you can get one of us in the bag, we'll work with you. Now, yeah, check out our website. We're on LinkedIn. Zac Thompson, Jack Frimston, wehaveameeting.com, all that good stuff.
Awesome. Anything from you, Zac? Or
No, that's where you find us. Too expensive, no guarantees, wouldn't bother.
Awesome. Love it. Nice one, boys. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Thank you.